Hey guys, what's up? This is a really interesting animated feature called Fire and Ice, and this has got artwork done by Frank Frazetta. And he's like basically one of the more well-known fantasy artists. Like people thinking about fantasy art and fantasy illustration, they're gonna know like a few people. And Frank Frazetta is the one person like people know as fantasy art. Even people that don't know any fantasy artists know Frazetta as a fantasy art icon. So this is basically a fantasy art cartoon. It's sort of like an animated feature called Fire and Ice. It's pretty cool, and it's a Ralph Bakshi film, which means that it's got animation that's sort of more like Wizards and Lord of the Rings. If you've seen the cartoon, the animation, it's sort of like that, but it's basically the art direction is Frank Frazetta, the stories Frank Frazetta, the characters are Frank Frazetta. Even like this guy, who's a pretty badass character, is a Frank Frazetta like character, invention. The girl. It's a beautiful like cover, but it's because it's a Frank Frazetta illustration. It doesn't look like this. The animated series does not look like this. It looks more like that. Interesting thing, it's about this girl who basically walks around all over the place, pretty much naked. Not really naked, but like in a very, very skimpy bikini. This dude also, he's like a Tarzan guy. He's also walking around like a little skimpy bikini and stuff like that. This one looks like the evil like priestess or whatever the hell that is. This is all, he's the hero, but then this guy becomes the hero. And then what else? And then these are like the monsters that come after them and whatever it is. It's really interesting. These are the characters in the story. She's really well done. It's a beautiful painting of this girl. You can see like just a Frazetta painting on the cover. And inside, what's nice about this one is it's got like a nice disc with the same painting on the disc. Yeah, you don't need it to be on there, but it's nice. It's nice when something is done well. And this is a Ralph Bakshi film, and it's produced by Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta does the animation. Now, the animation, don't expect like it to be Frazetta animation, which was a little bit of a disappointment in the way I looked at it, because it wasn't that good. Like the characters were Frazetta, and some of the motion capture, Frazetta had something to do with that, but it felt like, it wasn't art of Frank Frazetta in animation. It was just like an animated feature, and the story was also not that great, but it was good. It was interesting. It was a fantasy story. It was sort of about these characters. There's these monster beast people that are like coming after them. They kind of split up. He's trying to protect her, and then they're pretty much getting overwhelmed by these monsters, and this guy shows up out of nowhere to kick ass. And he's got this wolf skull, wolf head helmet or whatever it is, and he just comes over there and he kicks out. He doesn't even look this good though, but he's the cool character. She's like, it's nice that she's walking around in a bikini all the time, but but it feels like it was just put there to just put it there, for her to just like attract attention in a bikini. But this guy's pretty badass. I mean, he's the one that basically beats all of these monster people and saves the day and stuff like that. So, interesting series. I do recommend checking it out. It's not amazing. There are better stories like the Ralph Bakshi. Like I think Wizards was also good. I'm not going to compare this one to Wizards. If you saw Wizards, check that out. It's a great animated feature. Also by Ralph Bakshi. Also, The Lord of the Rings was actually pretty good with Frodo and Bilbo and all that stuff. But I saw that years ago, especially Wizards also. I saw that years ago. And Wizards was like a little bit of a funny feature, but it also had the girl in the bikini that's just like walking around in the bikini the whole time. Which is okay. I mean, it's fine. I don't mind that at all. And so this is what the story's about on the back of the DVD cover. However, I don't actually remember the story being about this, or if it was about this, they really didn't make a big deal about playing it out in the feature, but it does explain what the story's about, because it is a kind of like a feature where you kind of don't know what it's about. It's like they've been attacked by these beast people. He's protecting her. She's running away. They're all like, she's walking around in her bathing suit and, well, her bikini, whatever. And this guy comes out of nowhere and kicks everyone's ass, like all the monsters' asses. So I'm just gonna read what the back says. It's not bad. It's interesting. It's about the story and everything like that. Even though, like, when you watch this story, it doesn't look like that's what the story's about. In fact, when you watch the story, it just looks like a fantasy animated story, and it doesn't feel like the story's about anything. It's just like they're being persecuted. They're being sort of like chased after by these monsters, and they can't really beat these monsters on their own. This guy pops out of nowhere. He reminds me of like the Death Dealer kind of thing. He's sort of like a hero. He comes out of nowhere, saves them, beats the monsters, and that's pretty much the story. But it's nice to watch it. The animation is not that great, but it's good. So I'm just going to read the back of this for you guys. Cult animation legend Ralph Bakshi, Lord of the Rings, has created another amazing fantasy world in Fire and Ice. And by the way, there's no reason for it to be called Fire and Ice, because there's nothing to do with fire or ice or anything. However, Game of Thrones, the first book, Game of Thrones, the first book, Game of Thrones, the story is called A Tale of Ice and Fire, which is interesting because Fire and Ice, Ice and Fire, I don't know who did that first, but it does sound like it's a little bit connected. Animated fantasy world in Fire and Ice, a classic sword and sorcery tale of good versus evil. Pretty much that's what it is. It's a sword and sorcery tale. It's a fantasy world tale. There's swords, there's like the guy with the axe, there's monsters, and you kind of have to fight them off, basically. Set in Earth's distant future. Now I really didn't get that about the story, that it was in the future. It felt like it was in a barbaric past. It really just felt a little bit more like Conan the Barbarian world, not like some kind of post-apocalypse future, because there was no technology. Like, everyone had very primitive tools, primitive weapons. There were no guns. There were everything was primitive as hell. So if it was in the future, it was after the downfall of technology, and the story had nothing to do with technology. So it might have been intended to be in the distant future, but it didn't really show through in the story. It felt like the story was in a medieval past, because it was sword and sorcery, and you don't really expect that to be in the future too much. The world is undergoing vast changes as another ice age threatens to engulf the planet. That kind of did translate a little bit. Yes, there was some kind of it did feel like the environment was not hospitable all the time, but it didn't feel like there was an ice age. It didn't feel like, unless they did have an ice age in there, but they didn't make a big deal out of it, Ice age threatens to engulf the planet. Mankind has been pushed into a range of volcanoes to make their last stand against the approaching merciless cold. Okay, thing about the whole mankind was pushed into volcanoes is that the story's really about these people were in their tribe, and then they got attacked by these monster men, these Neanderthal. They feel like cavemen, monster men, beast men, sort of like that. It didn't feel like that there was any more story than that, but okay, I believe you here, the guy on the back of the box that explains it. Merciless cold, but the encroaching glaciers are not a natural phenomenon. They are both a weapon and the home of the evil Ice Lord. Yes, okay, that makes sense, because it didn't feel like a lot of natural phenomenon happening. It felt like there was a lot of magic, that the evil, the beast men were kind of made of magic or made from magic, or it's got that sword and sorcery feel to it, where it does feel like, it sort of feels like a Conan the Barbarian adventure, where it's the good guy against the bad guy, and this guy here feels sort of like a savage freaking Conan or something, It feels like the world of Conan. It feels like the world of sword and sorcery more than anything in the distant future or any natural disaster. It just feels like a story without too much thought behind it. So it's interesting that they actually explain what the story's about, because watching it, you don't really get it. They might have touched on, the story's about this and this is what's happening, but the majority of it is just the girl, and she's running away from these monsters, and the guy's trying to protect her, but really, he can't too much. He's getting overwhelmed by monsters, and then the weird guy with the wolf's head mask comes in and basically saves both of them and kicks the monster's ass. But it's a fun thing to watch, and it's not bad. So here you go. They are both a weapon and the home of the evil Ice Lord, Necron, and his horde of subhumans. Okay, that's who they are. They're subhumans. Okay. I don't know. I didn't know they were actually subhumans. They did look like that. Kind of makes sense that they are subhumans. I haven't actually read this thing on the back of it. I just watched the movie like a while ago, but what I remember from it is like pretty much what it was about, which was just a story of an adventure and basically they're being chased by subhumans. Subhumans. Now volcano and glacier, fire and ice. Oh, I see. Now I understand why it's fire and ice, because it's a ice. The evil guy is sending ice to the good guys, and the good guys are like hiding in a volcano so they don't get overwhelmed by the ice. That's why it's fire and ice. Okay. But the thing is that like that may be like a subtext of the story, but it's really not the main part of it, what the story's about, but whatever. Are on a deadly collision course as the two armies engage in a mighty desperate battle for survival. So the year it came out is 1982. It's 82 minutes. And it's really interesting. I mean, it's pretty cool. I like how, okay, the reason I got this one, I didn't even know this was Ralph Bakshi when I picked this up. This was basically recommended as a Frank Frazetta animated feature because Frank Frazetta had something to do with the art in this movie. But if you look at the actual art of the movie, it's not Frazetta art, and I kind of expected it to be, and that's kind of weird because it's supposed to be like Frazetta art, but I didn't really expect it, it's not Frazetta art. The front, this is what I expected it to look like, and this is what it actually looked like. Now, okay, whatever. I mean, it is animation, and it's hard to do. You can't do this in animation in 1982. You might even, you can't do that now with even technology. You can't do this kind of animation. This is a illustration that took maybe a long time to paint. And so animation's a little bit different. So, yeah, so it looks pretty cool, but this is basically what it's about. She's walking around in bikinis. This guy gets together with this guy, and they kick ass. You got the evil queen. You got the Tarzan-looking dude. You got the subhumans attacking them, and you got this thing going on. But it's interesting that that it says Ralph Bakshi because it feels like it does. It also says Frazetta. Now, okay, going in, I wouldn't expect this to be Frazetta. I know the characters are Frazetta, like this is a Frazetta character, but nothing else is. The girl maybe is a Frazetta character, but nothing else is. Everything, it's a Ralph Bakshi film. If you guys ever saw Wizards, it's also Ralph Bakshi. It's a cool film. It's a little bit funny. It's a little bit like comical, whatever it is. There's jokes in it. And this is like a serious sword and sorcery adventure. The other film is Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi, and that was the original Lord of the Rings cartoon that they did way back in the day. They did that like years and years ago. I don't even know like what year it was. It was like in the 70s or early 80s or something like that. And it was pretty cool because they took Lord of the Rings, and yes, it wasn't like a 3-part movie, but they took Lord of the Rings and they made it into an animated feature, which I think Lord of the Rings is really good at that because it's got the hobbits, it's got the wizards, it's got all of the good stuff. It's any fantasy could be animation because fantasy looks really good in animation. With this thing, it's not bad. Like I bought it on DVD. Would I have if I knew what I was gonna get from it, would I have actually bought the DVD? No. But I do think it's partly worth it because I got the Frazetta illustration, which actually, that makes sense for the, to get the DVD for the artwork. It does make sense, because I feel like, paying for the DVD, like just for the artwork, is legit, and the DVD is extra. It's still good. Like, even though I expected it to be like this, and it was like this, I feel like it was still good. I feel like it was still like interesting to watch. I just had my hopes up a little bit more, thinking it's a Frazetta animated feature, and when I saw the quality of the actual animation, it was a little bit underwhelming, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as good as like Heavy Metal the motion picture, and it was a little bit more, it wasn't even as good as Wizards. It was a little bit not as good as Wizards. Definitely was not as good as the Lord of the Rings one, because that was actually pretty good. But they made one of these sort of Heavy Metal magazine type stories. It was sort of like, it was something, it was a story it was like a Heavy Metal magazine story, and that's why I thought it was really, really good. And I also thought it was unusual, and it wasn't the regular cartoon. In 1982, there wasn't a lot of adult animation. And like in this one, they'll tell you right now, it's got a PG rating, and it says like, no persons under like 15, parental guidance. They don't recommend it for people under 13. Why? It's a little bit violent, and the girl's walking around in a bathing suit the whole time. Like a skimpy one, like the whole time. And that's why. There's violence in it. There's fighting in the movie, in the series. But in 1982, I think like Heavy Metal the motion picture also came out around 1982. So this is a time when adult fantasy animation came out, and obviously Heavy Metal was a better picture. They put good music in it. They put a lot of care and effort into it. It just felt like, sort of like, if you ever saw like Heavy Metal 2000, you kind of expected Heavy Metal the motion picture, the 80s version, and then when they came out with the 2000, it was a little bit not as great. It was still good, it was still okay, but it wasn't as great as the first one. And I feel like that's what this was. It's like they really pumped it up. They made it look really cool. They got the nice illustration on it. It's called Fire and Ice. It's pretty cool. It's fantasy. It's sci-fi. It's in the future. It's got swords and sorcery. It's got the evil, wizard and whatever. He's killing people with ice. They're hiding in the volcanoes or whatever, which I didn't really pick that up too much in the story. But, but it wasn't, you watch it and it was like, okay, it's not bad. It's okay. And so I really think that, like, I don't know why they didn't do anymore. Like, Ralph Bakshi didn't do a lot. He was actually good. And the thing about it is, what I'll give it to the story is that nobody else was doing this. And they were the only people doing it. So if you want to look at like an adult animated feature, there's not a lot to look at. There's Heavy Metal the motion picture, Heavy Metal 2000, Wizards. I'm not going to say that like Lord of the Rings was adult. It was for kids, actually. Wizards, and then there was this. And that's pretty much it. There's another one which I didn't like at all, because it was more of a modern day story, a modern day fiction, and it wasn't like a fantasy that came out. And it's, I don't remember what it's been called, but when you're looking at like animated fantasy features, there's not a lot to choose from. And there's not a lot made. I mean, modern day, there's a lot of anime, and there's a lot of that kind of thing, like Ghost in the Shell, a lot of interesting things for like grown-up people. But at the time in '82, there wasn't a lot of anime in America, or like anywhere outside of Japan. Like, and I don't even know what level in '82 what the anime was in Japan. Like, because anime just became big. And there wasn't a lot of animation and everything like that. So this came out at a time when things like this weren't coming out. Like, no one could see this. There was a lot of cool fantasy that was coming out at the time, like Conan the Barbarian came out as a movie, but there wasn't a lot of this animated thing that came out. There wasn't a lot of animation, fantasy animation that came out. It was just like everything in the 80s, like every animated feature was a cartoon, and it was basically for kids. And these are the first attempts to make like an adult animated feature with like a fantasy story in it that was like a fantasy movie but just animated, you know. So that was that. So let me know what you guys are thinking about this DVD and this cover, and have you seen this? What do you think about it? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe and share it if you want, and I will see you guys in another video later.